Kondapalli, who is a professor of Chinese studies at Jawahharlal Nehru University. Professor, thanks for joining us on the program. Aren't we already in a new Cold War between Beijing and Washington?
Well, the classical Cold War doesn't exist now as it existed between the US and the Soviet Union, because globalization is still the gel. China, US have more than $500 billion of trade. United States has 70,000 multinational corporations working in China, and they have about $700 billion investment in China market. Likewise, China is investing also among the US and its allies, is the biggest trading partner for 128 countries, including for Australia, for European Union, for several Middle Eastern countries, several Asian, African countries. So I do not think that there is a Cold War 2.0 in terms of the economy. Ideology-wise, of course, there is a pressure on democracy versus authoritarian leadership, as we saw President Biden's speech in the United Nations on relentless democracy and criticism of the authoritarian streaks. So there is a certain ideological element, but this is not very strong enough because the US and its allies are dealing with China at various levels. They have over 60 strategic dialogues on various issues. On energy, environment, we saw John Kerry visiting China recently. There are various other fora where they do interact. There is a strategic and economic dialogue. There are so many on, you name it, they have those dialogue processes. Likewise, between China and Japan, China and South Korea, China and Australia, although it has taken some beating recently, yet I do not think the Cold War is on right now, if we compare the classical Cold War scheme.
Yeah, okay, so if we disregard the classical Cold War scheme and the Iron Curtain and mutually assured destruction of nuclear weapons flying across the Atlantic from the Soviet Union to the US and the other way around, could it be said that actually the differences between Beijing and Washington could be even more serious than that classic Cold War scenario? I mean, clearly, the world doesn't want to suffer a nuclear catastrophe. But because you mentioned how integrated and interwoven the two countries are, China and the United States, that if this were to escalate, actually the effect would be felt around the world extremely severely in terms of its economic impact, especially.
Yes, I agree on that. There is a lot of tension between US and China. There is a move, especially by China and also, of course, the United States to have, are you with us or are you with them, as you mentioned some time ago. So there is also the Chinese pushing, when you look at the Uyghur issue, the European countries' resolution or the US Congress resolution on the Uyghur issue in Xinjiang, or on Taiwan, South China Sea, Senkaku Islands, or on other issues, there is an increasing possibly misunderstanding or even miscalculation. So on Senkaku Islands, for example, President Obama wrote to Yomiuri Shimbun in Japan saying that we support the Japanese administrative control over the Senkaku Islands, and put a caveat in terms of the alliance invocation on the Senkaku Islands on who fires first. It is then that the Americans will decide what to do, whether to go to rescue of Japan or not. Likewise, for other countries as well who are part of the alliances with the United States. So there is a lot of miscalculation here, and it could be even directly between US and China, as we saw in the South China Sea, because the United States had over 20 passing through these Taiwan Straits, and the USS Carl Vinson, the aircraft carrier, has been through the South China Sea regularly, and the Chinese are also launching missiles across. So this suggests there is a lot for miscalculation between the two sides. Of course, there are certain procedures, standard operational procedures that are there between China and the United States in the maritime domain, and there is discussion. And of course, we saw the regular visits the Anchorage visit, the Tianjin meeting by Wendy Sherman, and recently by John Kerry on the environmental issues. So there is a channel open for both sides, and there was a phone call between Biden and Xi Jinping. So there is a channel open for both sides in order to resolve some of these issues. It didn't exist, or rather, it existed between Soviet Union and China, but very, as you mentioned, the MAT principle separated them. So there is a miscalculation problem between China and the United States. But when you compare the kind of strength between the United States and China, United States has overwhelming nuclear superiority, nearly 8,000 nuclear weapons as compared to, as the Chinese say, or a maximum of 450 nuclear warheads for the Chinese, even though they say they only have a handful of nuclear weapons, yet the maximum probably they may have is over 450. And of course, they are transiting towards a limited nuclear deterrence, which means roughly about 2,000 nuclear warheads. And that is where the Trump administration had abolished the INF treaty and wants to have a new treaty to include China in this nuclear and ballistic missile programs.
Right.
There is, of course, the Chinese technology becoming increasingly sophisticated in many areas. And there is the China-US confrontation on many issues, on cyber, maritime, or on other issues.
Professor, thank you so much indeed for your time. Srikanth Kondapalli speaking to us from New Delhi.